So this is part of a three-part series on, I figured it's February, or we're coming on February. It's that month when Hallmark has kind of taken our definition of love and shoved it into this very tiny expression. And it's probably one of the most triggering or wonderful months, depending on where you're feeling in your romantic expression. And I thought, what better time to come forward with just a bigger story of love, so that's what this three-part series is committed to. And today's theme is we're going to be working with specifically the mythos, how to work with our mythic stories, and I'll talk a bit more about more of that. But first, let us place our feet on the floor. Imagine closing your eyes, really close your eyes. Don't imagine closing your eyes, close your eyes. Imagine that your feet, like feel your feet on the floor, and then see how that floor is connected to the earth. So you might have to follow the edges of your home and imagine the cement or the wood that touches the floor of this earth and the ground. And maybe for some of you it's icy cold, or for some of you it's warm, but just really beginning to feel how what you are touching is connected to the earth, and you are connected to the earth through this thing. Finding yourself connected to earth and realizing, what is that one thing that you need to tend to be fully present? Is there something in you that needs to be put down? Is there something in you that you're feeling anxious about, or confused about, or frustrated about? And can you gather that thing in your hands as if it's something that you can hold on to in the squeeze of your hands, and really hold on to it? Be really, really aware of what it feels like in your body right now. Now, this next breath, take in a nice, big, beautiful inhale all the way down to the very bottom of your back, expanding, expanding, expanding. And as you're ready, exhaling, but really shaking it out of your hands as if you are throwing it away. And as it comes out of your hand, it dissipates out of your system, out of your body. So I invite you to take in another breath. This time as you're breathing in as if you could breathe in from every pore of your body, all of the abundance, all of the love, all the generosity, all the consideration that you could ever imagine wanting, as if all you have to do is allow yourself to open every pore of your body and receive. And when you're ready, exhaling. And allow yourself some normal breaths as we do a little bit of alignment. So now imagining that there is a string at the top of your head and you pull on it. And as you pull on it, allow it to straighten your spine as if there's just something that lifts you straight up, light as a feather. And as that happens, now find what feels like alignment in your being. So just notice, are you leaning forward? Are you leaning back? Are you slunched over? Like finding yourself in this neutral zone. And what are we doing? We're preparing our vessels. We're clearing out our vessels, this tool for the creative life force to flow through us. So we're making space for it in our bodies. So rolling your shoulders back, opening your heart, maybe even allowing a neck roll or two. And just feeling all the different muscles in that amazing neck of yours, holding up your head. And then allowing yourself one more deep breath. And this one, breathing in your intention for our time today. You've given yourself this great gift. What will you do with it? How clear, how present can you be for yourself and your journey through your greatest, biggest story of love? So, breathing in as if you are allowing that intention to inhabit every single cell of your body, all the way down to the bottom of your feet. So that when the phone rings, the text comes through, or whatever wants to distract you, that you remember and hold this intention to yourself for the next hour or so. And I'm going to bring you a quote. What do you suppose creation is? What do you suppose will satisfy the soul except to walk free and own no superior? What do you suppose I have intimated to you in 100 ways, but that man or woman is as good as God, and that there is no God any more divine than yourself, and that that is what the oldest and newest myths finally mean, and that you or anyone must approach creations through such laws. That is by Walt Whitman. And here's one more quote for you. Stories have to be told or they die. And when they die, we can't remember who we are or what or why we're here. I'm going to read that one more time. Stories have to be told or they die. And when they die, we can't remember who we are or why we're here. That's some monk kid. All right. So, here's what we're up to today. We are going on a journey into the landscape of sacred storytelling. So it's not story as normal. We're going to kind of definitely go into Kansas. We're not in Kansas anymore moment. We're really working with story as a sacred art form and as a tool to be in collaboration with the divine. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to go a little bit over what is a story, and then we're going to really dive into what is a myth. And as I mentioned, I'll do a short review on what we did. Una and I will tag team in terms of what we did in the first class, and then we'll go into another full opportunity to do a writing exercise and even get to work with partners as you get to explore your own personal mythos. What's the one that you're living in, and then what's the one that you want to create? Okay. Your voices are always welcome, and your video presence is also really appreciated because stories are created by the people who catch them. It's a true co-creation process. So my eyes are on you, my heart's with you. I respond to your body movements, how you are in your body during this class influences where I go and what is said. And so if you feel inspired and if you feel like you want to understand something more, please just know that you can always put something in the chat box or raise your hand. And, um, and this is a collaborative experience. Okay, so just a few words about me is that I grew up on a farm in Vermont, and I was allowed to roam free. I was really, really lucky. I found writing and storytelling at a very, very young age. Hi, Carmi. And I found it as a way of healing, as really a form of escapism. There were some things that were very challenging to confront when I was young, and story was my ally. It was my savior. It was my way out, and it was my way in. It was my way into worlds I had never been exposed to or would ever be exposed to. It was my way into understanding the world in ways that oftentimes adults don't help children. And so I really understood it as stories are allies or as friends. And I understood and learned the responsibility of storytelling when I was 16. My best friend committed suicide. And I went to that modality, that place of writing and creativity that my parents had really fostered. And I went there to make sense of what had happened. And that turned into a play, and that was produced by a professional theater company. And so I got to see my words and my play on the stage, and that's where I learned the responsibility of storytelling. That what you put out comes back. So as you put out good, as you put out beauty, and as you put out grief, it comes back. I learned the the magic of storytelling when I was in New York City studying at Neighborhood Playhouse under Sandy Meisner's tutelage, and went to Williamstown Theater Festival and worked off Broadway, and was really in the professional world of theater. And we would always, something would happen. There would be like this thing in the room that would come alive. And I could feel the energy. I could feel this palpable magic. And I became very curious about how can we how do we catalyze that energy? How do we utilize it? How do we focus it so it doesn't just dissipate the second someone walks out the door? And that question really drove me as I became really clear that I was very committed to social justice and environmental protection. And so I went and studied environmental education through performance at a lovely school called Prescott College. And through that program, I got really introduced to the listening element of story, because I was introduced to a community of people, who gather in the wilderness, who gather around the fire, and the culture of being around a fire is listening. And that when someone speaks, it must mean that they have something to say. And so I really learned about how story builds culture and community and how we really share our learning also through those experiences. I went on to work with Al Gore at his television network and produced and hosted um, the Green Channel. And while I was there, I was really operating under this idea that if you give people the information they need to get to inspiration, to motivation, that will get them to activation. This was really around climate change and how do we get people involved in changing the systems. What I learned is that I was asking the wrong question. It's not about what information do people need. Wow, do we get that now, right? Information is very dangerous and very misleading and very confusing. And people don't metabolize information. If you've ever been in a room where people have to be given a lot of information and you're sensitive to energy, it's kind of amazing. All the energy goes, whoa. It gets really heavy in the room. And it's because we literally don't metabolize it. We actually make meaning and alchemize um, the the meaning of the story through stories. Okay. And so I began to really realize that I was asking the wrong question, and that my approach to using news and information to connect with people around stewardship of this planet was really the wrong approach, and it liberated me from a system that I really was not that I didn't have to be part of, and it gave me permission to go fully back into the realm of storytelling, and specifically into working with storytelling as a healing tool, both for the self and the collective. And that's when I got into creating story ceremonies. We've done great big ceremonies of over 200 people coming together to hold a story and then do forgiveness ceremonies with each other. So it's a fun world where so much is possible. And really, I would say 2017 was the year of the story. It's like all of a sudden we could see it in a way that we could never see it before. And so now that we can see it, we can also be in relationship to it. And so I'm just going to give you a couple of old ways of thinking about the power of language. So the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world. Can you believe that? That they believe that they know in their bones, because they've practiced it, that words are so powerful that they can slow the world or set it into motion. And I really recommend going and getting to steep in hula. Go on YouTube, watch those videos of true hula being practiced. It is an embodied prayer. Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. Let's think about that if I'm getting a little heated in a discussion. Australians say that the stories from the past need to be sung to the present so that the future can exist. The Inuit tell a story of that. There was a time when humans and animals both spoke the same language, and that animals could become humans and humans could become animals, and it was just a thing. But they knew that words were so powerful that they had great consequences, and you could just misspeak one word, almost anything could happen. The Japanese have a word called kotodama, meaning word spirit, and it refers to the original divine spirit of a word before it enters a word or thought waves. So the significance of kotodama is that words are alive and they have powers to create, which brings us right to one of the oldest words in the planet out of the Aramaic mysticism, abracadabra. I create as I speak. So, and then there's this, all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. The world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So now, as we start thinking about who we are as creators, and I love that, that's why I start with that quote by Walt Whitman, who says, it's a worldview, and you might not agree with it, but it's his worldview that we are just as powerful as any God, that we ourselves are also creators. And when I go into the scholarship of studying language and the history of it on this planet, when we understand it, every ancient religion agrees with that idea that we are creators through our words. So let's get into how we're using our words. Let's get into what is a story? What is a story? I'm truly asking you, this is the more interaction, the more depth we bring to this conversation. What is a story?
For me, can I speak?
Please, please.
For me, as I'm a teacher, but not of telling stories, but of telling stories, because we sit around a fire and we have a little medicine pouch of journeys that we've taken in our life and little tiny objects. And you put your hand in the bag and you pull it out. And each little object has a story to tell of something that has happened, a gift that you may have given me or one of the other participants. And with it, there's a long story that's told around the fire, and everybody listens.
Mm.
And then everybody finds a golden nugget in it. What you might find, I may not find.
So
Even in
I'm gonna
even in
I'm gonna
okay.
interrupt you only because I want to give a bunch of people an opportunity. But here's what I'm saying in terms of what a beautiful practice. I just love this. And one of the things I'm hearing in terms of what you're speaking to in terms of what a story is it can come alive. Everything has a story. That's what I'm hearing you say. And so
Yeah.
now Dawn's bringing us this animistic approach, which is an indigenous approach to the world, which is seeing the life in everything. It's seen seeing the life in everything. I'm
Hmm.
also hearing you say that you say what one person says, another person doesn't necessarily hear in the same way, and that we're all hearing stories based on our own lens. And wow, are we living in that time right now? I mean, this is such a words time. If I gave you a mythos of our time, I would say, once upon a time, there was a time when many stories were happening at once,
Hmm.
because we are not in a shared story. And you have to, we remember that, many different cultures shared a creation stories, they shared world views, they shared the same information, they received the same information. We are not in that time. So it's like we're actually dealing with like multiple layers. Not only are we not seeing the same stories or the same information, but we're also not even seeing them in the same way, which has always been the case. So this is, if there's ever a time of multidimensional, um, you know, muscle stretching, we're living in it right now. Anyone else want to speak to what is a story? What comes up is you? Yes, Karen.
Yes. So I was listening to her speak about her being a teacher. It reminds me of me. I used to take English as a second language class, and we used to bring an object that meant something to us. And I think stories help connect people together. That was one of my favorite activity as a young child. Just like so in awe of people's experiences with the objects. And the teacher like made it fun for us to learn the language, and we didn't even know we were learning. So I
Mm,
think stories also come with language, a form of your culture, a form of just emotions. As a little girl, I love hearing fairy tales,
mhm,
just stories about just emotions around themes of whatever love,
yeah,
the hero's journey.
yeah. So I love this piece that you're speaking around connection. And I'm so appreciating hearing these stories about how you're working with stories. And I want to point out, I just use the word work rather than use. How can we change, again, how do we, if we understand that there's a life in a story, so now I'm going to enter into this conversation, what is a sacred story? And if we understand that words give us the keys to the portals to understanding mysteries of life, when we say use, if you, it's the origin of it, I think, is UTI. It follows the language of employment, but even behind that, it has roots in language around enslavement. I always think about that, because people say, I want to use a story to make people understand this. Well, whoa, their language just like told you everything. And I always think, really, are you going to get the most out of something when you treat it like a slave? Because I think you get the bare minimum, personally, you know. And when you make something do something, I'm going to make someone think a different way. Whoa, now your ego is totally engaged. You are not in collaboration with divine. You are not in collaboration with inspiration because you are so driven in what you think is supposed to happen. We all have different journeys and we all have played different roles in our journey. So I'm not going to claim any rightness or wrongness. What my job to do is to help us play with, oh, how do we become those super spidey, uh, you know, glasses that spot all the sacred stories and all the zombie stories. So to go quickly into what a sacred story is, it's a story that has, okay, well, hold on. I'm just going to take one step back. Another way of looking at a story in terms of definition is to call it an operating system. An operating system. We understand that there was a travesty in our healing movement when the body was starting to look like a machine. And if we're going to go into the history of how the science mentality started to pick apart things and treat everything as if it was separate, but we're not going to go into that, but it's part of our human existence in Western culture. And so now we're saying, okay, along those lines of understanding, because we do speak that language, or the language is spoken like water in our culture, then I'm going to call it a story, for a lack of poeticism today, an operating system. And it's an operating system that teaches us belief systems, values, and what is possible, what to expect from the world. It defines roles. So we've got that, right? But now we're going to say, well, wait, what is a sacred story? What's a sacred story? A sacred story to me is a story that has the divine living inside of it. When I hear a sacred story, I come alive. I feel more juiced with life. I feel inspiration. I feel access to my emotions. I can hear a story about a really horrible thing, but that story was told not to scare me, but to bring me closer to the true life of what's happening, to perhaps empower me, engage me in getting involved. I would say one of the greatest dangers that's happened in the climate movement is that we've shown so many different horrible ideas about the future without giving people a role to play. So if I can't see myself in that narrative, then I got nothing to do. So might as well eat up all the fish before the ocean gets emptied. You know, I mean, it's like, so it's a really broken narrative. So I really want to inspire you to really, as you take in all these stories, just noticing, is that a sacred story or is that a zombie story sucking the life out of the room, implanting fear, implanting hate, you know? So that way you don't have to be in a state of fragility of like, oh God, don't tell me that story, it's gonna scare me. You can be like, oh, you can just like watch the runway. Imagine yourself at Fashion Week, just watching all the stories go by, and which one will you pluck out and allow to live inside your precious life force? Which one will you give your precious voice to? You know, and so that's where we're getting to think about just what is a story. So now we're getting into what is a myth, because that's what we're here to play with today. What is a myth? One of my favorite expressions of what is a myth comes from Sean Kane, who wrote a beautiful book. He's still alive, like I'm just trying to see if I can find it. Wisdom of the Myth Tellers. And he speaks to that a myth is the earth speaking out loud. A myth is the earth speaking out loud. One thing that defines a myth is that myth does not have an owner. Nobody gets to stake claim on writing that story. It's a wild creature among us. It's feral. It goes from mouth to mouth, you know, song to song. Some myths get written down, but I wonder about the ethics of doing that. But it's one of the ways that we get to preserve them when we no longer have oral traditions. So, yes, done.
Are you saying then that myths are not real?
Oh, I did not say that.
Okay, okay. I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. Myths
Just
are
what
more real to me than most factual stories, if you ask me. So great. Yes, Carmi, you're on mute.
Sorry. Can you tell me the name of that book again? Wisdom of?
Wisdom of the Myth Tellers by
Okay,
Sean Kane.
thank you.
And it's out of print. And if you go do a basic search, it's going to tell you that it's like $100 or something. But if you
Yeah.
keep searching, you can find a used version.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful book. It will expand. He is just a beautiful, profound book. Okay.
Great.
So, um, so we're understanding that myth is kind of this wild being. It's been with us since the beginning. You know, we have what are often known as creation myths or origin myths, where each, culture, indigenous culture, land-based cultures, it informs them about how the world works, oftentimes. Stories about how the sun came into being, how the earth came into being, how the ocean came into being. And you'll see that there are patterns between different creation myths from different parts of the planet. You know, we even saw that in fairy tales, that different fairy tales sprouted up on different places on the planet, but actually hold the same structure and even the same characters. So I always say, if you really want to get to know the land that you're living on, you know, why not have a moment of being quiet and don't go to the local museum, don't go study up everything. Do that eventually. But if you really want to become attuned to this land that you're living in and start to incorporate an indigenous perspective, which is an entwined connection, a relationship, then go sit underneath a tree and close your eyes and lean up against it and receive the wisdom of the tree as if the tree could talk, and allow yourself to free flow a story and ask it for his or her story. It is one way to truly get to know the resonance of a place. So the myth, another way of looking at a myth is, Michael Meade says that behind this dimension is the mythic dimension. So this is again a specific worldview that I'm engaging in through this conversation, that we live in a multidimensional world, and that we live different parts of ourselves, that we are multidimensional beings, and that a large majority of our consciousness lives in this one. Can I repeat that quote? Michael Meade says that behind this dimension lives the mythic dimension. Michael Meade is another living treasure on our planet, if you're not familiar with him, a true bard. Um, and so when we look at this, now we're going, oh, okay, well, wow. Um, this is so we're having a multidimensional conversation. We're saying that there's a sacred story, so it has a life inside of it, and that these stories live in another realm. And that when we, as conscious creators, what is a conscious creator? But as someone who creates with intention. I would pontificate that humans are not bad for the planet. that maybe there wasn't conscious creation, that we can't, that we are naturally creators, that we're always going to create. I would say that while some people really understood the impact and influence of what they were creating, I would say that many, many people did not. And that we're in a mess because of this situation, that we can't help but create. So what does it now mean based on the information? How do we create a narrative that we can live inside of, where we can actually make meaning of it and consciously create in a way that is in alignment with all life, thriving? So here we are, we're in this conscious creation conversation, and we're talking about what are the kinds of stories that we want to invite in from this mythic dimension. So if your intention is to bring more love to the world, or if your intention is to heal your love story, which we're playing with today, or if your intention is to bring compassion or understanding or empathy, or to shed your light on the darkest corners of our existence, you know that to me is like setting up your signal. Beep 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 beep, this is my intention, come to me, and this is your invitation to that. I'm going to call it the muse, that creative life force. You can call it the ancestors speaking out loud, you can call it the guides, you can call it the earth speaking out loud. For simplicity, I'm going to call it that creative life force. Your intention is your whoop, and then that's kind of like, now what stories will come to you. And this is where, because we're about to do an exercise, and I'm speaking to this, I think of it like if you ever do the salsa or a tango, you have to be willing to follow. Okay, you have to not be forcing the next move, because if you're trying to lead and there's someone else that's there to lead, and then all of a sudden you're in this blah blah blah, am I good enough? Is this good enough? Can I do it? Oh, I don't know. That's when all that noise starts to filter in, because you're not like in the middle of a hot dance. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to have some opportunity to play. And what I invite you to do is give your ego the day off, or at least the next, 30 minutes or so. It doesn't have to work so hard. And you are going to come into that place of being danced by the creative life force. Okay, that means that you just follow the flow. And the less you know about where you're going, the better off you are. The more you can be in the experience of shock and awe as you are delighted and surprised by what wisdom, what insight, what joy, what things you are being able to be given access to when you're in this collaborative relationship with that creative life force. So it was a big class. It was not an easy class. There was a moment where I felt insane for just doing it as an introductory class. But what we did was we really examined what were the different roles that we're playing. We looked at our love stories. We looked at the ones that weren't working so well in the linear, literal form. And we looked at the roles that we were playing, and we flipped them upside down. So that person who was creating great suffering in your life, where there was a lot of pain with, we took them out of the role of the bad guy, the cheater, the lover that you didn't want, or the lover that you did want. We took all that and we flipped it on its side, and we put them, we recast them in your story as your master teacher. And now, what if when we rewrote the story to say, oh, everything in your life is happening for you, not to you. So we played with that version of the story. And then we went one step further, so bold, and we played with this idea that let's take this idea, the concept of the wounded healer, and throw it out the door, because wow, who wants to be perpetually stuck in this identity of being wounded? Not so interested personally, And what if we work with another narrative that, and this is a worldview, this is a myth, that what if certain souls, certain beings, came to this magnificent planet in the cosmos because they really wanted to heal her through one of her greatest initiations. They really wanted to support her, and that she's going through a great big initiation. And so we each came with our personal mission of our superpower for what we could bring healing to. But in order to actually bring the healing, we would have to know the wound inside and out. Okay, so now, woof, again, we just flipped our story on its back. That big medical crisis, that when our home burned down, when we got fired, when so much loss and grief, all of a sudden we have another narrative to look at it through, as if we are being initiated to bring our greatest gifts to this planet in this very unique time. Okay, so we did a bunch of like, we just took everything. I brought out the rattle. I literally rattled it. We shook up all the stories, and that's what brings us to today. So now that we've shaken everything up, and we don't have to take everything so literally, what is it rooted in? And rooted in linear, and there's a whole other way that we could go into what started happening when we started reading books. Women immediately, that's when you can trace back the history of patriarchy, actually, with when words were starting to be written. And so we understand that it's a very complicated history that I can't go into, but now we're saying, okay, what if we go back and we get out of this literal framework of what is right or wrong or what is true, what a dangerous word, and now we're coming into this conversation around the myth, like what are our myths? Okay, and what do we know about myths? But we have total freedom to listen. So I'm inviting you into the state of complete and utter freedom with your stories today. So our first example of playing today, and welcome everyone who just came on, is I invite you to get a piece of paper and make a circle on it and place you in the center. This is not about being a great illustrator. This is merely about being able to do some symbols. And then let's start identifying the different myths, the different fairy tales that influenced you as you started to make your way towards a relationship with love. So if I were to begin, I would start with Sleeping Beauty. Start thinking about the movies, the fairy tales. Particularly the myths, particularly the stories that you were told as a child. Gabriel, did you get the question? I just want to make sure that you understand or not. Okay, so what we're doing right now is you're getting a piece of paper out. You're placing a circle on it. On the inside of that circle is you. On the outside of the circle are all the different myths and stories that you heard as a child that defined or shaped your worldview about love, and specifically what role you'd be playing in love. This is not a right or wrong game. This is just like, oh, wow, right. Oh my gosh. I thought I needed 7 dwarves in order to find a prince. I could never find the dwarf, so love would never be. I don't know. We're having fun with it. Do you all have a good handle on that? Okay. So, do we want to? Okay. So, Diana, I think many of us spent and learned a lot about the world through television. The television was definitely the babysitter. Um, and so let's just look around and say, what were you expecting? Especially if you're watching televisions, what roles did women have? They were secretaries, they were wives, they were the other woman. I mean, there were very, like, especially when I was growing up, there were not, there was Wonder Woman, but that was a rarity, right? And she lived outside the realm of reality, woman in power. She didn't live in reality, you know. So what were the stories? What do people want to bring to our conversation? What are you picking up? What are you noticing? Oh, right, Mary Tyler Moore. That was before my time.
Doris Day.
Uh-huh. What did that mean to you as an expectation around love? Like, what did that teach you about what to expect from your life around love?
Oh, I thought it would be perfect. Have the perfect husband, Everybody was always dressed perfectly. It was just like being perfect in general. And if you said what you were supposed to say and do what you were supposed to do, everything would be fine.
Okay, great. So this element of perfection. Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Anyone else want to share some stories that inform their worldview?
I also, there was no TV when I was young, or we didn't have a TV. I used to make my own stories in the woods with the birds, etc. But one was you often heard people say, a prince will come on a white horse and take you away from all of this, right? And somehow I never believed that story. The picket fence, the white picket fence, the man on the white horse, because of my way of living, it just did not seem realistic, right? So for me, I created my own love in the forest. I believe that's those birds, the animals are what taught me love.
So you had your own almost Snow White experience. You know, when we look at all the stories, they're all very, very old. Those fairy tales are very, very old. And if you really take some time to examine them and examine them through different cultures, you'll start to see the threads. And one of the things around Cinderella, is that not Cinderella, Snow White, was around relationship with the natural world.
Yeah.
And so I love that you had this embodied piece.
Yeah.
And the Wizard of Oz, that was a major influencer for me too. Cinderella, Snow White, Knights of Shining Armor, right? Saves a day and sweeps you off your feet. Gosh, poor guys growing up, man. Like nobody, they sell us this idea, but then they don't give them the armor. I don't know. It's a mess. Okay, who else? Who else wants to share? Yes, Linda.
Well, a couple of different things. I also remember Doris Day. I remember Guys and Dolls, Camelot musicals a lot. Um, and the main message was it will be happily ever after. That your love story led to this finding the person and you got married, but then there was you didn't have to do anything after that.
Right.
And that was a, a real big lie.
And like what a mess that whole happily ever after is because it's not actually a mechanism of how humans or how life operates.
Right.
Right. And so a more honest ending would sound like when the day ended and all were grateful for a wonderful day and they hoped as best they could and they prayed that they could carry that feeling into the next day and the next day and the next day too, because the next day is going to be the next chapter, you know. And so I think that's it. It's this mentality around story acts as if time freezes, and that because you have this most magnificent day, the rest of your life will be just as magnificent, you know. And so right, there's a little bit of a schism with that. Gina is saying like water for chocolate. Oh yeah, along with other wonderful Disney love, like water for chocolate. Every sex scene should be so steamy that it burns down the house. Um, and right, the saint stories and Catholics Una is bringing us to from Catholic school. Um, and she had a story where her head was lopped off and reattached. Saint Winifred. I don't know this story. But I was actually raised on the children's book of Bibles and the children's Bible, um, being Jewish. And it was really interesting integrating those stories and what they put into my system at that and how they were designed. And then Cami was influenced by Russian folk tales. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you an opportunity just to take a look around. Again, we just went in our little story hunting expedition to examine what are the stories that we've been eating off of. You know, what has been nourishing us or starving us? You know, what has been creating, looks like food, but actually we're just forever famished in this concept of love, right? We're waiting for the white, the the guy on the white beautiful horse to sweep us away, and we miss all the wonderful, kind gentlemen who are right in front of us. So, I just did something that's so horrible that I want to take it back because I hate that language of we. It's a very dangerous language. There is no we. I really learned that from Stephen Jenkinson. I'm a student of his, and I've interviewed him for several different classes and articles. And one time I couldn't help stop asking it, like, well, what do we think about this? Or what do we, and he had to keep saying, please don't use the language of we, because there's no shared culture in this room. There's no shared experience. And what I also know as a storyteller is that the second we create a trip like that, where I say we, and then all of a sudden you have to pop out. You're like, well, do I agree with that? We're no longer in coherence. So I think so oftentimes that language of we can pull people out of an engaged expression of riding a wave together. When if I just simply said I, you're still just listening to me and then noticing if you've had a common experience or not, but it's not tripping you up. Okay, so a little side note on talking story with people. So now here's the exercise that I really want to bring you into today. To take your love story, to take a love story that you've had some challenges with. Take a true moment in your experience of life. Take a real moment that's happened. And what I like to do in this particular moment, because we're working with story as a healing modality, as a tool for healing. So what I want to invite you to do is to really think about a time that sucked. Like the more it sucked, the better. Like you kind of wish it never happened, perhaps. Or it's another way of looking at it is it's an unresolved experience in your life. Maybe you are so evolved that you're like everything happens for my best, greatest self, but still this thing really hurt. It just freaking hurt. And so great, let's play with it. So we're going to play with this story. Does everyone have something to work with? Okay. Tell me, like, shake your head no if you don't. Okay, great. All right, so we're going to take their story and we're gonna put it, we're gonna ball it up like a snowball, and we're gonna throw it into the mythic dimension, right? What's behind this veil. And we're gonna look at how it's playing out in symbol, metaphor, and archetype. Okay, so now we're going to be entering into more of the story of the soul. We're not repeating it as once upon a time a prince and a princess. This is not a thinking game. Okay, so this is where all that I spoke about before about allowing yourself to be danced by the muse. What is it to create a sacred story when the story informs you? So you're actually handing over the story. This is no longer your story. Okay, this is you being willing to be an active witness in how your story is playing out in the mythic dimension. It's sort of like go to the museum and look at a play, look at a painting. And you're like, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. I never noticed that. Oh, wow. That looks good together. Okay, so you're going to be playing with a very different worldview. I want to talk just for a moment about what is an archetype. And an archetype, if we want to get into it, does anyone want to tell us what an archetype is? Everyone want to take a, yeah.
Okay. It's different sides of the self.
Mm-hmm.
We have many roles that we have in our life. So you might have the queen, who is controlling and dominating and ruling. And you might have the queen that is full of love and leads her people and guides the people in the right direction.
Thank you.
So we all have several archetypes that we work with.
Yes.
So, right?
Yes. Right.
Right. I just find it strange that I'm even here because I fight against writing.
Oh, well, you don't have to write. You can just let it just kind of flit about you. And you know what else you can do when you do this is you can go and write a story map. Okay, so you don't actually have to write the story. You can write the bullet points, and you can actually use it as an oral expression. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Let me get to this little piece first. So Another way, so right, we have many different archetypes living through us. Some of them are more at the steering wheel than others. Some of them get called out and get to play out more than others based on the environment that we're in, the situations that we're in, the people that we're with, what they want and what they expect from us, their greatest fears of us. There's nothing, I have really enjoyed this experience. I've really learned that we do create, we call out the best or the worst or worst fears in people around us. I just watched someone just they really called out this part of me where I'm like, wait, I don't like to be that part. But our dynamic keeps calling out this part. So I'm like, do I want to be with that person that calls out like my worst self? No. So and I say that all the parts are in us. So this is when we understand, when we have this archetypal language, we can be like, oh, well, that's just wicked whiny Wendy. She likes to hang out on Wednesdays and complain about everything. Or that is my highest and best self. Or that's the goddess of love, or the queen, or the maiden, or the muse, and we'll always walk through them. Another way of looking at an archetype, archetypes are patterns of psychic energy, patterns of relationship. Archetypes are organs of essence, the cosmic blueprints. The blueprint is actually a really common term that's used of how it all works. Archetypes are patterns of creation yearning at the threshold of reality to enter into space and time, right? So it's an energetic form. It's in the mythic dimension that can be expressed through us as humans. Archetypes are constructs that provide order, meaning, direction to apparent chaos, right? We have the warrior, we have the wisdom keeper. Archetypes link individuals through time and space into an essence family. So that definition is from Dr. Jean Houston. Um, so let's take this, let's carry our love story into the mythic dimension and start playing with and understanding what is the essence energy that's living through those stories in the purest way, and can we get to come into contact with it? So you've got your story that you're willing to engage and see how it's playing out in another dimension. You understand that you're not going to be literal or linear about it, that you're not just doing it, you're just not transposing it, and that you're actually going to open up for this creative expression. An experience of seeing your story play out in a way that you might never have seen before, through symbols, myth, and archetype and metaphor. What is a metaphor? It's the language of spirit. So I invite you to, do you have, it's helpful for me to know how many characters are in your story. So there's at least one other person in your story. Does anyone have two people that are in their story? Two other people other than yourself? Oh, just two, says Drew. Okay, you and someone else. Okay, great, that helps me understand. So I'm going to lead you through a very short meditation. Okay, I could make this meditation 20 minutes. I'm not. We're gonna do it pretty fast. So I really invite you to bring your full focus to it, because you can do this quickly. Okay. So allow yourself to close your eyes. Feel your whole body sense. Feel your heart. Connect that grounding cord from your heart straight down to the very core of the planet. And imagine your grounding cord plugging into the very core of the planet, just like a light socket into the wall. Sometimes when that happens, you might feel the inclination to even straighten up, because woof, you're like now plugged in and connected. Coming back to your heart space, still connected to the earth. Imagine that grounding cord now going straight up to the top of your head, straight up through the roof, straight up through the universe, and you are now in a white room, the creation space. And this is the place where you can see what's playing out in the mythic dimension. You look around this white room and you notice that there's a door right in front of you, and you approach that door, and you know that on the other side of it is the mythic, archetypal, symbolic expression of you, and you open that door and trust what you see without having to understand it. You might want to acknowledge it, bow to it, close your eyes, close the door. coming back to the center of the room. To your left, there's another door. You go to that door, and that other person that's in your story, their symbolic expression is right there. And you open that door and you see them. And you close the door. You come back to the center. You notice to the right there's another door. You go to that door, and you know that on the other side of it is the landscape that your story takes place on. So open the door and notice, is it ocean? Is it desert? Is it forest? Where does your story live in the mythic world? Closing your eyes, coming back to the center. As you're standing there, you see that right in front of you there's a pedestal. It just appears, and on that pedestal there's a gift that the story has to give you that arrives in symbolic form. You might want to pick it up and bring it into your body being in some ways. If you could just slip it straight inside your stomach, or maybe it wants to go into your throat, trusting where in your body do you want to place that gift. And then noticing that right beneath you there is a tunnel that leads you right back down through your grounding cord, down to the universe. You're popping right into it, down to the earth, right above your country, coming down above your home, and slipping through the roof right back into your body, all the way down to your toes. You might want to close up that energy field at the top of your head. And as you're ready, opening your eyes and writing down just notes of what you saw. So write what you are. How did the other person in your story show up? What landscape is your story on? What gift is this story offering you? Another way of saying that is, what gift did this initiation offer you? Now, here's the thing. We are now playing with a different language, right? So it doesn't make immediate sense. And I recommend that you don't go looking up your symbols right now, because your subconscious revealed something to you. Okay. And so we're not going to play with that part. I invite you to go straight into allowing your characters that offer themselves to reveal how they want to interact in the mythic dimension. And the best way to begin that is to say, once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was and you name the first one that shows up, and you allow the story to flow through you and for you just to follow what happens. And again, the less you understand, or the less that you know where you're going, the better. You are not repeating the same story. You're looking at, how do these symbolic energies want to engage in that space, trusting that you went in with a clear intention to heal a story and to have elements of it reveal themselves to you that you might never be able to have access to if you're only using your ego mind to make sense of it when you're living a multidimensional experience and only looking at something through one dimension. Okay, so I don't want to say anything more. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to write. Okay, is everyone clear? I will see you on the flip side of 15 minutes. Okay, so come on back. Our 15 minutes of creation time. And everyone finds something that they are now playing with. Playing being the key approach. Did anyone not? Did anyone like come into just like that big thick barrier, not going anywhere with this? Okay. One of the things, it's so fun. I'm working on a guidebook right now called The Creator Matrix, and I got to talk about writer's block, and I realized that, and it brings great fear to say this, but I always say I actually don't believe in writer's block. What I believe is that there's that flow of creative life force energy, and sometimes there's a barrier between us and experiencing the energy. When we understand that there's a barrier, then we can start to maneuver around it. We can go up, over, around, or straight through it, or remove it, or whatever. But just because it's like a horse doesn't see the thing that they're going to jump and go, oh God. No, the horse sees it and they're like, yes, and they jump over it. So that's where it's like, I feel like whenever you hit those blocks, they're gifts. They give you things to actually engage momentum and power and strengthen yourself as a creator. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into small groups. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'll tell you how this modality came into being, which is that I had a situation that I could not find peace with, and my human self could feel that there was something bigger happening behind the scenes. And no matter how smart or crafty I was with my egoic expression of making sense of it, it wouldn't settle in my bones. And so I did this exercise. And this is an exercise that I created through writing a novel. It's very simple: grounding and sourcing, and connecting to spirit, and then following the flow, listening, just following what you see. And again, the intention being the key ingredient. That's the piece that really makes, I think, defines whether, all different, anything can come through. Whenever I hear someone say, oh, I just trust in spirit comes through me, I'm like, whoa, there's a lot going on over there. So it's like, I don't want any old thing coming through. I want to be really clear about who I'm calling to me and who I give access to live through me. So thank you for saying that, because what I found was that I had one of the most healing experiences of my life several times, over and over again, when there's something really unresolved that I can't understand. This simple exercise, I feels like, gives me access to a much bigger story. And so for someone like you who's like, hey, that I found an archetype that actually I really want to work with and continue to develop a relationship with and live through in a human way, there's a couple of practices that you can do. One of them is create a ritual in action. So you can create an altar to this being, and feed it and nourish it, as we call it, forward, and give it more attention. What would, like what we place our attention on grows, you know. And so that's one way. Put flowers on it, nourish it, study it, go learn everything that you can now about this art, what everyone else says. You've learned a couple things, but now see what is in the universal field of understanding. The other thing that you can do is you can go back to your story and your mythic imagination. You can come into yourself, and this practice takes 30 seconds, by the way. This is not a long practice. And you can go back to that moment in your story and allow yourself to really feel the energy of that archetype in your body. So now we're talking about like bringing this is like the integration process of bringing that part of ourselves fully present in this human body. And so you can feel that energy in your body, but really do it. Like, your body will not be in the same position as it was. So if you're that unicorn that all of a sudden spreads her wings and flies, like, give yourself the expression of feeling the power of unicorn, wah, and allowing your arms to go out and feeling that with your eyes closed, so there's no mirrors, nobody's looking at you, feeling the exaltation of that. And then once you're in the fullest expression in your body, open your eyes. This is where the integration happens, and still walk through the room like that, and you do that 5 times. Do it 5 times in a week. It just took 15 seconds, 20 seconds. And now that energy is alive. There's a place for it in your body. Your body knows what it feels like in the somatic expression. So when you're in life and all of a sudden you come against those things that bump up against you being that version of yourself, you can call on it. And just that simple thing of presencing the energy in yourself when this thing that you're bumping up against can call forth another way of engaging. You're now it's having direct influence on what archetype is you're calling forward to be expressed through you. So that's one way. Okay, I'm going to read you a quote, unless there's anything else that wants to happen, and then we'll be on our way. And the reason why we end with a quote, I'll tell you why. Because at the end of every Tai Chi class, I bow to my teacher. And it's not that I'm bowing to him, it's that I'm bowing to his teacher and his teacher's teacher. And we're bowing to the lineage. And so, what I understand by speaking the words of others before and after we begin, it's like taking our place in the lineage of people who have committed themselves to understanding the word and our relationship to it as humans. So that's what we're up to over here. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to play my new instrument that I just got for Christmas while I read it. Act as if you are people of consequence, so that I can treat you as such, and that you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world was to have no consequence in this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to proceed that there is consequence to us being here. That quote is by Stephen Jenkinson. So I invite you all to take yourselves off mute and to say farewell in the way that you like to. And thank you all for your presence and for your listening and for your sharing. The spaces, definitely, stories are created by those who make them. We make them by listening and by telling them.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.